Hello, Bernie Wall here, and today I'm going to do the last of my videos on your top 10 IELTS questions, and we're going to be looking at the listening test. So through these series of 4 videos on each part of the IELTS, I've picked out the questions that I get most often from my students. And speaking, to be honest, is not one that I get a lot of questions about, because working mostly with band 7 and 8 students, most of the students that I work with have good speaking skills, and they don't often need to do a lot of speaking practice. Having said that, even if you are a native speaker, I think it would be a good idea to do some practice of the test before you actually go on your test day. Because forewarned is forearmed, and it means that then there are no surprises. And for those students who are around band 7, band 7.5, 8, the bit that can be an undoing is part 2. So it's very useful to practice part 2 because it's not something that we do every day, giving a little speech. And I would say even native speakers, if they're asked to make a little speech, even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they would ordinarily practice a little. So let me get the questions up, and we'll run through them. And I'll give you the advice that I give to students when they ask me these kinds of questions. So make sure you perform well. It is a bit of a performance. You're actually there to let the examiner know that you have wonderful speaking skills. The main thing about the speaking is that it's a test of communication. So you need to be spontaneous and you need to be fluent. You need to be as error-free as possible, but the odd mistake is not going to be a big problem if your communication is good. So let's have a look at the questions. Okay, this is a problem. And the answer is you can't improve very much unless you speak. Speaking is a skill, just like all the other parts of IELTS, and in order to improve it, you need to practice. So if you don't have anybody to practice with, it's going to be rather difficult to improve your communication. Practicing by yourself is a great thing for pronunciation, but for actual communication, you do need somebody else. So I would urge you to try and find somebody. There are websites where you can find speaking partners, speaking buddies, and have a good search and see if you can find somebody to practice with. It does not have to be a native speaker. It just needs to be somebody who is at your level or even slightly better. But do, try and find something, or it's not going to improve very much. Okay, most of the things that come into part 2 are everyday things, things that should be within your experience. And it's important to try and maximize the 2 minutes. The more you say, the more the examiner has to test, to listen to, and to assess. So try and organize it well so that you can say 2 minutes. Get an idea of what 2 minutes is. If you can tell a story, that's the best way of dealing with this. So you need a beginning, you need a middle, and you need an end. And if it's something about your experience, so if it was a journey, if it was something that you did, then that's easy, because you can imagine how it was, have a picture in your head, and tell the examiner the story. If it's something like a description, sometimes you're asked to describe a friend or a family member, then think about the things you can say about that person, call up the memory of that person, and then follow through on the little card and try and maximize what you say. Another thing is try and front load it a bit, because what I find quite often when practicing speaking with students is they run out of steam. So they get to about 1 minute, 1 minute 10, and then they've done everything on the card. And then they scrattle around trying to find things to say, and that's where the communication starts to fall down. So try and front load it, try and say more things at the beginning during that first minute, so that you've still got things on your preparation list for later on in the part 2, when you've still got some seconds to go. The best way I find of practicing part 2 is to record yourself. Because it's very difficult, even if I'm practicing with students, for them to really hear what's going on. I can say, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, but me telling you is not as good as you realizing it for yourself. So I always tell my students, record a part 2 topic, listen to it, analyze it, decide how you can improve it, and then record it again. Then go through the same process, decide how you can improve it even more, and then record it again. If you have the patience, you can record it even more times. I had one student once who used to record them about 8 or 9 or 10 times. But then as he became more confident, they improved, and then he found he only needed to record them maybe 2 or 3 times. But if you listen yourself, you'll always find something you can do better. And the thing to do is then to record it straight away and do it better. And then that will stay in your practice, and it will help you to improve your skill. Practice, I think, is the best thing. If you remember what I said about listening last week, if you have a problem, you may want to find some relaxation techniques, and you can look for those on websites about examinations. If you're just nervous because you haven't practiced enough, then make sure you practice. Don't go to the exam until you've practiced enough. Having a little bit of nerves is normal. It's a normal reaction to the situation of an exam. And it's not a bad thing. A little bit of adrenaline before you go in helps to keep you on your toes, and it can actually help you to deliver well. But if you're very nervous, then you need to think about practicing enough so that you don't feel nervous. The job of the examiner in that first part of the test is to try and make you feel a little relaxed. So, you know, the first minute or so, or it's probably less than that, should be a little bit relaxing, and the question shouldn't be too difficult. But listen very carefully to the question before you start your answer, so that you're clear what they are asking. And then that listening should also help you to calm your nerves a little bit. Right, pronunciation is counted, and from what I hear, examiners are taking more and more note of pronunciation. If your pronunciation doesn't affect the understanding and it's all very clear, then it's probably only a minor thing, and it probably won't affect your score. However, if you do have a very strong pronunciation, then it might be worth trying to do something about it. I refer you back to the recording. When you record, as well as listening to what you say and the words you use and the grammar, etc., try and listen to your pronunciation as well, and decide whether you need to practice the pronunciation. You can do a lot with pronunciation by recording yourself, by speaking out loud, by trying to read out sentences, phrases, and trying to get them close to how a native speaker would say it. So recording can be very useful for pronunciation. Okay, the sounds. One thing you can do here is to try and find out the kinds of sounds that are often pronounced incorrectly by people who speak your language. And there are websites. There is a book called Learner English, but there are also websites which say these vowel sounds or these consonant sounds are often pronounced incorrectly by Spanish speakers or by Russian speakers or Chinese speakers, whatever it is. And that will give you an idea of the kinds of sounds that you may need to work on. And again, you can find things online to help you with this, but it is a doing thing. It's speaking, saying, uttering, and listening. So recording all of this is very helpful. Mirrors are also useful because if the sound is coming out wrongly, it's possibly because your mechanics in your mouth, your tongue, your teeth, etc., are not quite in the right place. And you can use a mirror to help you to do this. If you go and look at the blog post that I wrote on pronunciation, that goes with this video, you'll see I've put lots of links in there for websites where you can practice this. Okay, something's gone a bit wrong. Okay, right. Stress patterns are where the stress is on the word, so like impossible, or where the stress is in a sentence. So how can I improve my stress patterns in English? So the two stresses there would be on improve and on English. And of course, sentence stress helps you deliver your communication much better because there are no elements of confusion. And when you put different stresses on sentences, it can change the meaning slightly. And that can lead to some confusion or some misunderstanding. So having good sentence stress is quite important. Having good word stress is also important because it helps you to improve your pronunciation overall. Again, if you look at the blog post, I've put some links for this, but it's the same as above. The best way is to have a model and then you repeat the model. So that's where pronunciation websites can help, because you listen to the model, which would be a native speaker, and then you try and copy, and pronunciation improves through copying. So have a look at those sites. Recording yourself, you should be able to hear if the stress pattern in either the words or the sentences is off a lot or is not quite right. But if it's only a slight problem, you may not be able to hear that yourself, but it would be good to work with somebody else on it and they'll be able to tell you. Intonation is the last bit of the language. It's how our voice moves up and down when we speak. Now, there are two particular things in English, and one is that in questions, our voice usually goes up at the end. So how can I improve my intonation? And that goes up because we're expecting a response. It also goes up when you haven't finished. So in a list, for example, I'm going to buy potatoes, carrots, turnips, and cabbage. And when we get to cabbage, our voice goes down so that the person that you're speaking to knows you've finished. And if you keep going up, then the person will not answer or not come in. So in an exam situation, if you're not managing your intonation well, then the examiner may not be able to come in with the questions. So it is, okay, that probably wouldn't happen and they would come in anyway. But it is important to get your intonation right. So normal sentences go down at the end and questions go up at the end. And there are other things about intonation patterns. English has quite a wide intonation pattern. Our voices go up and down quite a lot. So if your language has a very narrow intonation pattern, that may make you sound either a little bit boring or a little bit uninterested. And so it can help if you work on these things to make you sound a little more animated and a little bit more interested and involved. But again, if you find articles on pronunciation and they specifically tell you about your language, it will include things like stress and intonation. And you can find out quite a lot and then practice this by recording it, by finding models and then imitating. Okay, great grammar and great vocabulary. Again, it's a little bit like the writing. You need to use more sophisticated structures to get a higher score. You need to use a wider range of vocabulary and more sophisticated vocabulary to get a higher score. And the examiner will take note of all of these things. However, remember, the most important thing is communication. So please do not sacrifice spontaneity and fluency for looking for good grammar and good words to use. Often where the focus goes on grammar and vocabulary in the speaking, the student is not fluent. And it's much better to do it the other way around. So to try and be fluent and spontaneous. And what you'll find is if that grammar and vocabulary is in your memory banks, it will come out. The more you practice, it will come out. If it's not there, then you maybe need to learn some and get it into your memory. But the focus should always be on listening to the question and then giving a good answer. So the listening part, the communication part is key, and it's the most important thing. This cannot happen. It just cannot happen. You have to say something. If you don't, then you won't get anything. The examiner can't give you a mark. So whatever the question is, you need to try and find an answer. And if you're not sure about an answer, sometimes students are hesitant because they're not sure whether the answer is sensible or it's going to fit the question. Then just say, I'm not sure if this is the kind of answer you're looking for, or I'm not sure if this is really relevant to the question, but I personally feel. And by doing that, you've already given the examiner a lot of good communication. So don't not answer questions. Just come up with something. I'm sure that you will be able to come up with something. If you want to talk about something and you don't know the word in English, try and find another word that you do know. But if it's an object, let's say a flower, and you only know the word in your own language, then say, in my language, it's called blah, blah, blah. I don't know the word in English, but it's a big white flower with a beautiful scent. So there are always ways around it, and it's very important, in fact vital, that you find these ways around it. So not answering a question is very serious in the IELTS exam. Okay, I hope that's helped a little. A lot of people do ignore pronunciation, and I think you shouldn't. I think it's useful to try and pronounce everything as well as you can. But the key thing, as I said before, is that you must communicate well. So don't let anything else jeopardize your communication. But if you have a partner to work with, then you can ask them about your pronunciation. Do you think my accent is too strong? Is there anything you can't understand? How do you think I can improve it? And you can work with that person answering those same questions for them. So the speaking really is about more and more practice, and then your skills will improve. So I hope these 4 videos have been useful. Remember that I have also written articles, many of which have links in them, and they can be found on my website, IELTSlearningtips.com, and there should be a link at the end of this video for you to go over there. And there are other things there to help you with your IELTS. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.